Families of Thinkers here for you today, and I'm excited to have everybody here. Our topic of discussion this afternoon is Bodies as Evidence, the Miseducation of Difference. And so everybody just look around at your windows, take cognizance of who's here. We're here in solidarity today. No one needs to be reminded that 2020 was a display of some of the grossest episodes of miseducation that many of us have bared witness to in all of our lifetimes. And to add to the long obituary, yesterday afternoon, news broke of the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, credited by Hillary Clinton as having paved the way for women in contemporary politics. So if you would join me, I would just like to take a minute of silence and remembrance. And feel free to type in the chat how RBG has influenced you and your feelings upon her passing. So let's just take a moment here, please. Thank you. Thank you all. So like I said, I want to invite everybody to use the chat freely and openly to express whatever you're feeling throughout the program. And I would like to proceed with our agenda for today. So this afternoon, we'll proceed with presentations in the areas of the body as archive, the state in the body, and the protesting body. And we hope that our series of panels inspires questions and dialogue. And we hope to encourage you to use the chat openly and freely for questions to our panelists or for just for discussion's sake. And I am assisted by Professor Chris Anir today, who will be helping me collect questions and synthesizing them for our panelists during discussion. And then we'll stick around too afterward for a little bit in case people want to have discussion or further develop any ideas that came up during the program. It's tough to say, but sadly, due to recent events on campus regarding Zoom bombing, we've taken the precaution of muting everybody other than those presenting. Our team of admins are prepared to kick and mute offending individuals, but also the CET would like to respectfully request that in the event that we face this type of bigotry, we will unmute everybody and ask everybody to unmute their microphones. And just join together in a unified chant of Black Lives Matter, please. This symbol of solidarity is all that we can really have in the face of that type of hatred. So I thank you. And now I'd just like to pass the mic to the Fisher Center's very own Jessica Farrell. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you so much for welcoming us all and helping to make sure that this is a safe and productive space for us today. Unfortunately, many of us have had recent experiences that have proven just how fragile these safe spaces can be. And that's why I want to start from what might seem like an unlikely place today. I want to start by talking about fear. As many of you know, the last teach-in the CET organized was later revealed to be the target of a Geneva City Councilor's homicidal daydreams. Frank Albanese wasn't subtle about it. He came straight out and said what he wished he could have done to those of us participating in the forum that day. He said, and I quote, "The college did their whole thing for police accountability. If I could have got a gun and shot the squares on my computer screen and killed everybody, it's disgusting." In this day and age, after our country has suffered through innumerable mass shootings, words like that can literally take your breath away. and they definitely can leave you with a certain amount of fear. And so when I said I'm going to start today by talking about fear, I'm sure many of you thought I meant that I was going to be talking about my own fear or the fears of my colleagues in the CET. But that's actually not what I meant. You see, in the aftermath of Frank Galanese's hateful, violent words in response to our educational forum, we asked ourselves, what is he so afraid of? Our answer was that he was afraid of losing his position of power, not necessarily as a councilman, but as a white man who benefits from the current systems of inequality and injustice that we were challenging. He was afraid that the status quo might be disrupted, a status quo where he is doing quite well. So we decided that our teach-in should focus on how power functions in our society. We decided that we should take the time to unpack how these systems of power treat people differently based on the bodies that they inhabit. We wanted to speak about how bodies are differentiated by the system, how this reading of the body can impact the relationship it has to the systems of power that seek to manipulate it in order to maintain the status quo. This fits into our collaborative's larger mission of doing just what our name says, promoting community education to bring about transformation. Issues of race, class, disability, and gender are too frequently swept under the rug, considered not the subject of polite conversation. Particularly with relation to race, we too often see our society trying to pretend to be colorblind, to fervently declare we don't see race. But of course we see race. We are socialized to see and respond to racial cues at every turn, just as the systems we have built are designed to recognize, reinforce, and perpetuate racial difference. And yet when George Floyd's life was stolen by the Minneapolis police at the start of the summer, we saw a change. In addition to the widespread protests, we saw a growing number of Americans willing to engage in these hard conversations about race. We saw Americans, and particularly white Americans, recognize their complacency and address their ignorance. And it was in this moment that the group that became the CET was born. Our first teach-in, Voices of Protest and Love, Liberatory Knowledge in the Hour of George Floyd, was held on June 13th. In the broader Geneva community, the killing of George Floyd prompted the formation of the People's Peaceful Protest and their focus on establishing a police accountability board. Inspired by their work and looking to contribute to that movement by encouraging community education, can you see why it's in our name yet? We decided that we would have our second teach-in and that it should be an invitation to the Geneva community to join us in learning about police accountability boards so that we could all contribute to these local conversations from an informed position. While the event itself seemed to be a success, we've already spoken about what transpired after the Zoom window closed and we all left our squares. And that brings us to today. Since this is our first teach-in during the new academic year, the CET is predominantly, yet not entirely, made up of HWS faculty. We gave particular thought to how we wanted to address our students as they embark on another school year in the aftermath of a summer of change. We know that many of our students came back to our classes, and particularly to campus, battling fears, old persistent fears of racial and gendered violence and of discrimination, as well as new fears rooted in the pandemic, of course, but also in the threats from this city councilor and those who support him and those who are emboldened by his words. We wanted to help our students process these fears and invite them to think with us as we process our fears as well. We wanted to show our students that in the face of our own fears, we could choose action over mobilization and education over despair. This became all the more urgent this week when our community's virtual space became the target of another vicious attack. Another virtual space and another virtual attack. It sounds almost fictional, doesn't it? Like it's made up or disconnected from our reality. And yet the pain these attacks cause is real, and the bodies that feel that pain are real too. Councillor Galanese might have spoken about shooting the squares, but he also betrayed that he knew that there were real bodies behind those squares when he finished by saying, "Kill every body." Bodies. A virtual space like the one that we're in right now doesn't exist without the very real physical spaces we are each inhabiting, and without our very real physical bodies. We cannot disentangle the two. And as the title for today's teach-in says, our bodies are evidence of the life we live, of what we choose to say and do with them, and of how others perceive and project onto them. And the categories of difference which shape how our real bodies interact with one another and the state are then transferred into this virtual space too. We do not escape our racialized, gendered, classed existence. We bring that with us into our space on the computer screen. I wasn't on the meeting that was Zoom bombed this week. I wasn't bombarded by those hateful words and symbols. I didn't feel the helplessness of not knowing how to make it stop, how to protect myself and those I care about. But I was on the Zoom call that VP Hussein organized the next night, when so many of our HWS students, staff, and faculty expressed how they were fed up and called for action yet again. I want to speak for the CET and say that we support those calls and that we will continue to use our positions within the colleges to amplify them, and that we will work with the administration to move this agenda forward now. But while we're doing the work of pressing for institutional change within HWS, we're also going to use our capacity as faculty here to push for lifelong education that continues outside the formal classroom. We're going to continue to promote community education in the name of transformation, because we feel that education should be the basis of our civic engagement. So whether you're a current student at HWS, or you're a member of the wider Geneva community, or if you're someone from a bit further afield who maybe saw the flyer for today's event and was moved to join us, hi Mom, we're happy that you're here to think with us. As I've said, today we're going to be focusing that thinking on how our bodies are marked and interpreted, both by us and by the society we interact with, and specifically by the state. We're going to speak about how difference is constructed through our recognition of embodied diversity and the ways in which we imbue that diversity with a certain significance as a result of what we're calling miseducation. The first panel is the body as archive. It will have three presenters who speak about discourses of difference, how those discourses are then written onto our bodies, and how those discourses then shape our lived experiences. After a brief discussion section, we're going to move on to the second panel, the state and the body. In this panel, we're going to hear from two presenters who will speak about the nexus of space and belonging, examining how the state compartmentalizes bodies into corresponding spaces and uses state violence on particular bodies to maintain this system, with attention to how the intersection of disability and policing is particularly fraught. Another brief discussion will follow, and then we'll have our final presentation, the protesting body, which looks at how bodies can transgress the spaces they are supposed to be confined within. And then we'll close out with a longer discussion as an opportunity to process everything that we have heard today. Again, we thank you for thinking with us today. Let's get started. So I'm going to hand it over to Professor Slade to start our first panel, The Body as Archive.